Assalamualaikum. I am Muhammad AMIRUL FAZLY bin Abdul Mus from Group 1, together with my friends DATU EZUAN bin DATU ABDUL JALIL, Muhammad AFIF FARRIS bin FAUZEE, SITTI ADINAH binti ADNAN, and SITTI NORHASIKIN binti KARMIJAN. Together we will explain about the US invasion of Iraq driven by realist theory. Before the invasion of Iraq is an Islamic country in the Middle East. It was a country that was rich with natural resources such as oil. In 1997, Saddam Hussein was the head of the government for Iraq, where they practiced totalitarian type of government. Before the leadership of Saddam Hussein, he played an important role in a military coup in 1968, where they wanted to overthrow the current leadership at that time. In 1970, Saddam Hussein successfully seized total control of Iraq, and thus became the most powerful person in Iraq. In 2003, the United States of America and its allies, Great Britain, invaded Iraq because they believed that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, and Saddam Hussein has a link with a terrorist group that has a connection with the 9/11 incident at World Trade Center, New York. As of 2014, the United States has spent more than $3 trillion and lost more than 4,000 service personnel, while its allies lost more than 200 of its personnel. Even so, during this invasion, Iraq suffered more, as more than 160,000 Iraqis died during this war, and many buildings were, such as hospitals and houses, were destroyed.
Before we proceed to the international event, it is important for us to understand first the realism theory so that we can understand the justification of actors in international relation for the behavior and decision. Hence, we chose realism theory to analyze factors of US invasion to Iraq in 2003. Realism is a school of thought in international relations. It assumes that human nature plays important role and influence the nature of international political system and actors within it, and that the first impulse of that human nature is survival, and survival may require either or both conflict and cooperation. In our topic context, I will explain two branches of realism. First, let's take a look on the classical realism. Thucydides view classical realism from the Peloponnesian War, where fear which felt by the state leads to war. Basically, Peloponnesian War is a battle between Athens and Sparta. The growing power in Athens has led to the attack launched by Sparta. Here we can observe that the action by Sparta was because they want to protect their own state, because Sparta know and afraid Athens will eventually attack them in future. As for Hans J. Morgenthau, he highlights that conflict occurs because human has desire to dominate other, which also known as animus dominandi. Thus, states' behavior is a reflection of human where they carry it out in the international stage. He also emphasizes power which is used for survival of state. Survival here means maintaining sovereignty. Hence, the key to survival is to have power to defend from external threat and pursue one's goals in the face of opposition. Meanwhile, neorealism can be understood through the view from Kenneth Neil Waltz. He stressed that power and security is the crucial part in international relations. State leaders rationally choose a foreign policy that will minimize security risk in an anarchical international system. What Waltz refers to anarchical system is that there is no central government that control other states' behavior. Also, he said that none is entitled to command, none is required to obey. Therefore, we can see that some states choose offensive method in order to protect their security. To compare classical realism and neorealism, it lies on the cause of conflict in international relations. Classical realism believes that conflict occurs because human nature always craves for power, whereas neorealism believes it's due to anarchical system. From the perspectives of these realist thinkers, we can conclude that war will always occur because state, which is the main actor, is struggle for power and act according to their national interests. Realism as well highlights that the world is an anarchical system where it lacks central authority and thus result to continuous war. The next presenters, they are going to explain factors of US invasion to Iraq from realism perspectives.
Alright, now, let us examine the factors of US invasion to Iraq using realist theory. But before that, let's take a look back to history to have a better understanding on how US becoming the only developed country that it is willing to use forces to defend the country and when the dignity of the country is challenged. After the World War II, the defeat of Germany and Japan, and of course the exhaustion of Soviet Union has led US predominance in escalating its GDP to more than half of the world's total. US becoming the world's largest shipping operation at that time, and its military strength capable of defeating any country, coupled with being the only country that owned nuclear weapons. This method had stimulated US industry, which has helped the world too to increase its technological capabilities and further help US citizens to enjoy a higher standard of living. As to survive, realists know they need to increase their power through internal development first, such as in the economic system, technology, diplomatic relation, and military aspect especially. US become the global superpower of economic influence through the free trade integration and its role of activism and leadership in world affairs. US internationalism has tempered by the new emergence of isolationists. One of it is Al-Qaeda, the forefront of terrorist attack event on September 11, 2001 in US. Put the factor of maintaining peace, US using its strong military power to invade Iraq. The spark of military power echo, and as the world police has led US to declare war on terror to those countries that were suspected to have linking with terrorism group. The same year in November 2001, US launched an attack to Afghanistan to destroy Al-Qaeda and remove Taliban regime that harbored terrorist group in Afghanistan. US invasion to Afghanistan first has lasted in 13 years conflict until 2014 with withdrawal of foreign forces from the state and casualty number was rocketing. 2 years after 9/11, US started to put a special attention to Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi dictator, which US continuously asserting that there is a link between Iraq and Al-Qaeda and had strengthened the case for Iraq invasion by US. The US is long-standing to maintain world peace, yet somehow diminish its own value as it is started to ignore UN disapproval, establishing military commission, warrantless wiretapping, intolerance and torture to detainees, all turn against US value as human rights leader before. The ever since 9/11 attack has challenged US dignity as the hegemony power. The full utilization of military power to attack those countries by the means of self-defense and to maintain peace in the country or any other leverage is as to show power when its security is threatened. It is in accordance with the realist theory as US used its military advancement and alliances to make up the humiliation and disgrace felt by the government as the powerful country.
The weapons of mass destruction being addressed consist of chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. It can kill and bring significant harm to numerous individuals or cause great damage to buildings or mountains. The scope and usage of the term has evolved and been disputed. often signifying more politically than technically. The weapon of mass destruction are the threat for the US. It was because of the tragedy of 9/11. The American foreign policy was forced to take a more aggressive stance against potential threats throughout the world. Iraq was a country with high on the administration's priority list due to possible ties to terrorism as well as the potential threat of weapons of mass destruction. The Bush administration identified Iraq as one of the biggest threats to the United States because of the previous history between the two countries. The dictatorship of Saddam Hussein represented a major threat to the United States due to its potential for the weapon of mass destruction, along with Saddam Hussein's prior use of chemical weapons. Iraq also held a strategic position in Middle East economically and militarily. The Bush administration justified the invasion of Iraq in 2003 by saying that there was strong intelligence pointing to the existence of weapons of mass destruction stockpiles. Furthermore, the biggest motivation for the invasion was rooted in the possibility that Saddam Hussein was developing nuclear weapons. The first issue of weapons of mass destruction is Saddam Hussein's refusal to cooperate with weapons inspection and United Nations security resolutions. Over the years left many officials skeptical about whether or not he had something to hide from the rest of the world. Many people thought that Saddam Hussein did have chemical and biological weapons and he was in the process of developing a nuclear weapons program. Next, if Saddam Hussein did not already possess nuclear weapons, there was a strong possibility that he would in the coming years. This is significant in relation to the Bush administration's motive because after the invasion of Iraq, no weapons of mass destruction were actually found, spurring the notion that the main reason for invasion was non-existent. This led many people to believe that there was a failure of intelligence going into the war and that possibly the Bush administration had ulterior motives for waging war in Iraq. But the fact that no weapons of mass destruction were found after the US invasion does not mean that they never existed.
Saddam Hussein's connection to terrorism is the second justification for the US invasion of Iraq. Saddam was essentially charged with supporting terrorist organizations financially by endorsing them. The Institute for Defense Analysis at the Pentagon claimed that Saddam had engaged in a number of terrorist-related actions. For example, Saddam provided and stockpiled the military weapons at the country embassies in the Middle East Asia and the portion of Europe. Additionally, it was discovered that Saddam produced terrorists who were trained to carry out missions both inside and outside of Iran. Next, when it comes to terrorist organizations, Saddam was linked to finding a number of radical and extreme groups globally, including the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. According to a report by the Institute for Defense Analysis at the Pentagon, the ELJ had significant ties to Iraq and was able to conduct operations in Egypt in 1993. Additionally, Saddam had ties to Al-Qaeda. George Tenet, the director of CIA, has cited numerous examples of this engagement, including the fact that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, one of the commanders with close ties to Al-Qaeda, was being harbored in Iraq. Tenet hinted that it is impossible for them to believe that Iraq was participating, even though he admitted during his testimony that he is unsure whether Iraq supported Zarqawi's campaign. Next is the end of Iraq invasion, where Saddam Hussein had declared in early March 2003 that it is without doubt that the faithful will be victorious against aggression. He went into hiding soon after the American invasion, speaking to his people only through an occasional audio tape. Coalition forces were able to topple his regime and capture Iraq's major cities in just 3 weeks, sustaining few casualties, President Bush declared the end of major combat operations on 1st May 2003. Despite the defeat of conventional military forces in Iraq, an insurgency has continued an intense guerrilla war in the nation in the years since military victory was announced, resulting in thousands of coalition military, insurgent, and civilian deaths. After an intense manhunt, U.S. soldiers found Saddam Hussein hiding in a 6 to 8 foot deep hole 9 miles outside his hometown of Tikrit. He did not resist and was uninjured during the arrest. A soldier at the scene described him as a main reason to his fate. Hussein was arrested and began trial for crimes against his people, including mass killings in October 2005. In June 2004, the provisional government in place soon after Saddam also transferred power to the Iraqi interim government. In January 2005, the Iraqi people elected a 275-member Iraqi National Assembly. A new constitution for the country was ratified that October. On 6 November 2006, Saddam Hussein was found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death by hanging. After an unsuccessful appeal, he was executed on 30 December 2006. No weapons of mass destruction were found on Iraq. The U.S. declared an end to the war in Iraq on 15 December 2011, nearly 10 years after the fighting began.
In the same thinking, we have suggested that in order for the hegemonic power in the world can be controlled to some extent, a constant pulsing to the hegemonic decision to act on any war is needed. It is undeniable that U.S. forces is always readily engaged to any peacekeeping action. Yet, several circumstances have led U.S. to against law of war, which is the most important principle is the illegality to attack innocent civilians. It is quite unjust for only U.S. is not liable to an act of against war crimes and let its military system act only in their own interests. The role of United Nations should impose a strong collective voice and action to against hegemonic power to involve in any intervention to the other state which is not mutually agreed upon. This also to avoid U.S. act by their own decision to end of diplomacy and declare war like what the country did to Afghanistan without seeking further resolution from United Nations. As United Nations is a symbol of international order, then it should preserve international norms and order of all countries, including United States.
As a recap, the US decision to invade Iraq in 2003 can be seen through realism perspective. The US wanted to maintain its image as a dominant power in the international stage. Not only that, security issue motivates the invasion, as Iraq was accused to have weapons of mass destruction, where it was seen as an international threat. Saddam's close connection to a terrorist group also influenced the war launched by the US. All of these are related to power and survival of the US as highlighted by realist thinker Hans J. Morgenthau. At the same time, the rationale of US decision is in line with neorealism, where this can be seen through Kenneth Neil Waltz that stressed state leader minimize security risk as utmost priority on its foreign policy. That's all from us. Thank you.